JPM everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for organizing this decade of institutional murder of Rohith Vemula to bring everyone together. I think the past 10 to 15 days, you have reached out to each individual through the kind of programs that you have done. This is a memory of a decade of loss. I don't think many of you must have been in your schools. You might not even have heard about what has happened to Rohith, what led Rohith towards this institutional murder. Yet all of you have joined in this spirit of communion in terms of remembering Rohith. I salute and thank each and everyone who is gathered here. And I'm going to be the most anti-Ambedkarite today, because Ambedkar believes in preparation well, reading well, and speaking with a clarity of thought. I'm not going to do that in any sense, because I'm going to mostly speak on the basis of experiences of how this movement has arrived, a decade of institutional murder, and see some of the outcomes that have come through. Dickens, yesterday we were having a conversation. He was telling, why shouldn't we tell the stories of ourselves, because no one is going to tell those stories. Of course, that's a longer project. But kind of, just to kind of touch upon Thirumal, who's here. Thirumal, very aptly, when he describes these Brahmanical spaces, he says affirmative action allows to inhibit formal spaces. All of us, through these affirmative action policies, we come into these spaces, yet, but not culturally cultivated space. We don't have those cultural cultivation that happens. And how this cultural cultivation happens is the story of Ambedkar Student Association, which began in the year 1993. That cultural association is what is indicative of the Parai performance that taken, which has disturbed auditory senses of few who might have probably kept their headphones and then just walked away right from there. Yet, that particular form of disruption of auditory senses, it's also enabling this space as a space of communion where the culture, which is not to be treated as margins, but the culture which is on par with diverse cultures, can be brought and played on the day when Rohith was institutionally murdered, yet as a mark of remembrance. Because mark of remembrance is also to remember what Rohith has believed in. It's not just to mark the institutional murder, but what he believed in. What was Rohith? What was he doing? How was he engaging in terms of communions? Rohith was an exceptional person. When he used to play cricket, I used to treat him as my adversary, because when I bowled, he hit a six. How can I bear that? And that's the moment when we have lost the match to him. I never had any direct encounter with Rohith till that point of time, but he was a cricketer. In Sukun, he will come in his lungi and then just roam around and engage with everyone, disrupting that imagination of popular senses, right? How you should dress. It's not something that he wanted. He had proposed what alternative thing can be in his own imagination. Rohith was someone who had broken when sciences are supposed to cultivate science, right? But sciences, unfortunately, have never been scientific in their nature, in the sense of those who get trained in sciences. The way in which they perfect, the way in which they perform caste, the way in which they practice caste, it's the most unscientific thing, right? If Payal Tadvi's mother, Abedar Tadvi, could say, I can sustain cancer, but not caste. How powerful that is, that cancer which eats oneself, caste is much beyond than that, right? So Rohith has broken that in life sciences. When he participates in student elections, he brings the crowd of students. When he was in SFI or in ASA, he was the single opposition to anyone who was there in life sciences. And that's how Rohith was, right? Rohith was someone who would accept criticism. When we were having discussions on alliances, for example, Rohith is not someone who shies away. Despite someone having attacked him, he doesn't agree to this fact that no, we should not go and have dialogue with them. He is someone who puts forth this proposal for the purpose of unity oppressed. You must unite. He's someone who's that self-reflective. One must read Sudipto Mandal to imagine how Rohith had his life from that childhood of haunting past, yet surviving through all these gazes, having friendships through Riyaz and many more at University of Hyderabad, and how he reached here. And one should also read his note through this entire life sketch that he had. There is both alienation and communion. Both of them were together. Now, however, the alienation had its greatest its greatest halt on the mind that was otherwise thinking, the mind that wanted to become a writer of science, the mind that had that wanted to walk in the footsteps of Carl Sagan, just as Ambedkar had embodied himself with this rational, critical, scientific inquiry in his analysis. Rohith was that kind of a person, right? When we remember Rohith, we also remember the life that he lived. It is not just the life that we imagine through whatever that has happened through the institutional murder. Yes, we also remember what has happened to Rohith and to all of us. Who were we when we imagine ourselves? We all were coming from those tiny little villages from across the country, right? In our case, Telangana and Andhra. And what were we doing? I was playing cricket. I was busy in playing cricket. I didn't want to come and join with the organization. I was open to have a dialogue on reservation as pro-reservation, not pro-reservation, as anti-reservation, because I want to kind of be in the good books of my friends and companions. I was not willing to join ASA, because I mean, the moment if I join ASA, I'll be known. It was that sort of a person. But my imagination could only be changed with building up of a collective space that had happened in this University of Hyderabad. Whenever there were attempts to build this collective space through assertions, their caste has always operated in a counter mechanism. If 2002 episode of rustication was one instance, 2015 social boycott was another counter revolutionary tactic that was performed by the casteist university spaces, which were operated through Brahminical forces, right? Now, there, we all were trying to build a space where we can come together, we can talk together, where we can assertively establish. I don't think I would have learned more in my classroom than I would have learned sitting in auditoriums where Ambedkar Students Association invites speakers. I don't think I would have learned enough of writing, but for my engagement in writing of posters, where my poster writing is appreciated, I learned the art of drafting representations. I've learned my writing through the shared experience that was built by this space. I think that's where whoever was standing up for these spaces were also singled out and were attacked, right? And these attacks have become more rampant post 2015. Yet we survive. I think that survival also is extremely important, right? And we survive when we remember Rohith. Rohith's ideals survive through all of us, what he dreamt of not treating a man to his immediate identity, right? To imagine a boundaryless imagination of human beings and to ensure that any kind of alienation happens. That's where this collective communion has a greater responsibility in that sense. Now, when we were in the consultations on the draft of Rohith Act, to just give a short story of how this space has cultivated some of the best minds. Roy Anto, he was part of anthropology, if I'm not wrong. Roy Anto comes from Tamil Nadu. He never spoke up in any of the gatherings. He used to sing very well, but he wasn't someone who appears to be shy in nature. The moment he passed out of the university, he started a collective called Ambedkar Reading Circle. This Ambedkar Reading Circle would organize sessions in Cubbon Park. Thereby, I mean, Cubbon Park otherwise, which was an elitist space, just the existence of Ambedkar Reading Circle makes that, oh, here some of our events have happened. right? That makes that space itself as belong, the sense of belonging, right? As we see a sense of belonging whenever our cultural forms are performed, right? So thus, they were organizing that. And when we had Rohith Chadat, then when we were remembering Rohith, when we were proposing for this idea of Rohith Act, it was those young students. I mean, it's a different question, but they're young students along with Mridula and many more civil society groups who came together with one round of meeting that culminated in this entire People's Campaign. And to kind of note that someone who was silent at University of Hyderabad could contribute to organizing of it, whether he stayed till long or not is a different question. But he, along with this group of young persons, have contributed towards developing of this act. I think many organizations have come forth because this was coming from independent collectives, not motivated by any kind of political aspirations, right? And that's where, when we were just reading out on the definition of discrimination, I was very moved. I became very emotional when some discussions were happening. In this, the discrimination was defined as, for the purpose of this act, means any intentional or unintentional action or omission that has an adverse effect on an individual or a group of individuals. This word omission has a lot of importance in the lives of 5 of us, in the life of Rohith Vemula, in the entire struggle. It was one act of omission of that fresh inquiry clause that led to this entire series of episodes of violence that was committed. To define that we have experienced discrimination. No, omission is not an act of discrimination. Omission could be illegal, yet Vice Chancellor has this discretionary power to do whatever kind of things, right? Now that gets ruled out with this particular kind of a definition, where an act of deliberate omission, you are often ignored in the classrooms. That is not an act of ignorance, that's purposive, right? There are certain laws that are there, or as post-matric scheme of scholarship. If students were not allowed any exemption from payment of fees, that's a deliberate act of omission, right? Where you have to constantly fight for this. Your lives have to be revolved around that. That's a deliberate act of omission. Non-implementation of reservations, that's a deliberate act of omission. It's a commission of an offense, right? Now all of these happen from the top-layered administrative bureaucracy, right? Now to kind of frame this law, that's where I became a bit more emotional when I was reading this. And one more thing, thanks to Mridula for having worked out on that, which is the right to overcome caste prejudice. And this is where the communions comes into place. This is where organizing comes into place. This is where ASA or any Dalit Bahujan organization's presence in campuses is an attempt to overcome caste-based prejudice. We are organizing to overcome caste-based prejudice. We are not organizing to perform caste. Unlike certain of those who perform caste, we are organizing to overcome caste-based prejudice. And this gives an entitlement, a right to organize. Oftentimes when universities or administrations the tactics are to sabotage these modes of organizing. This gives a certain form of right to organize. And this right to organize is not meant as a right of, disruption in the sense of cultural senses should exist. Otherwise, these spaces will become more and more alienated, right? However, this right to organize is also an expression of communion, is an expression of self-worth, self-respect in these meaningful exercises that we tend to do, right? And again, fear can be rooted individually. It is on account of this fear that many of us surrender to the forces, right? If I do not listen to that person, what will that person take an action on, right? Now, if this fear becomes individualized and if everyone becomes part of the Brahminical force, right, then your collective interests are lost. That can only be averted through collective organizing, right? That's where we have survived and we want to survive for these collective organizations, through this collective organizing towards the exercise of annihilation of caste. I mean, that's a longer exercise, but at least to feel disalienated, right? Not to get alienated, to have a sense of ownness, to have a sense of belonging. We want to organize. This is my appeal to everyone to ensure that these modes of organizing survives. If there's a rock on which we have written Jal Jangal Jameen, that implies we have made that an embodied space. If there is an auditorium where we have organized talk, that makes it an embodied space. If at Velivada or erstwhile North Shopping Complex, we were organizing songs of resistance, that was making that space an embodied space, which was otherwise not permitted to be. If installing a large portrait of Ambedkar is also to make this space an embodied space where I can feel myself belong in this institution. I think these practices must continue to exist, and these must be defended under the right to overcome caste prejudice, because it is this organizing is not performing caste, rather it dismantles caste. And with this, I would like to also state, in the sense of identifying persons, it is how they tend to respond that matters the most. This is 10th year of Rohith's institutional murder. This is also 10th year of Una struggle, and that was led by Jignesh. Now, Jignesh is not a leader of the movement. Jignesh is a member of Legislative Assembly. And when one approaches Jignesh, when Jignesh says, brother, I'll cancel any programs of mine, yet I'll come here. That usage of brother itself is sufficient. It's not placating oneself above or pushing other below. I think in campuses, we tend to use these phraseology, brother, sister, right, within organizational frameworks. That's a sense of attachment, love, through which we tend to organize these spaces. We feel together, we feel owned, right? Visharadan Maharaj walked 10,000 kilometers. He may have difference of opinion on many themes, yet accepting criticism as long as it is scientific, it must be accepted. That's what K.G. Satyamurthy has said, right? Someone who walked away in founding a radical political organization for that organization not in implementing what principles on which it stood for, right? So thus, everyone, and Advocate Raghunath, we had the best cross-examination ever. I have to reveal this. And this cross-examination, I don't know. I will not be able to speak about it because it's still in the legal domain. But I would like to state that those who have created falsities could not face the truth on the day. And one day will come, if this struggle persists, if everyone unites in the same spirit, it is no doubt we will have a victory. Even if we don't have a victory, there's a joy in fighting against falsification. There's a joy in resisting caste-based oppression. I think that's what we all stand for, and that's what Baba Saheb Ambedkar stood for, and that's what Ambedkar Students Association stood for. That's what 10 Dalit students who were rusticated in the year 2002 have stood for by refusing to give an apology to get an entrance into the university, yet accepted the apology and walked out with a dignity. Now they are all serving in great positions in every university. If they would have given an apology, this wouldn't have much difference to their lives. But to community, it definitely makes a difference. It is their stories which has inspired us, right? In this spirit, we will for sure, as long as we are alive, we will carry this Justice for Rohith Vemula struggle. And no matter how many stays with this struggle or not, we are committed in taking this struggle on. I'd like to thank Abhay Tadvi and Radhikamma for taking this struggle in the Supreme Court. If you see UGC notifying the UGC regulations, it is on account of them reaching out to the Supreme Court, and these guidelines, even if Rohith Act comes, it is the responsibility of the student organizations to ensure that act has a meaning, because many acts, many legislations existed in the past, but it is organizations that ensure that these acts have a meaning, have a purpose, and it is organizations that nurture ideas around the importance of these acts. With this, I would like to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to thank everyone for joining. I also appeal everyone to kind of be with us in this saga. I also to just say, Vigita, your work on Brahminical patriarchy, not Brahminical patriarchy, that's a different thing, but your work on deconstructing gender, it was very important for us in the sense that the way in which you take the example of how the shaping of an idol by men would often result in masculine ideas, right? In the same way, even though anyone, that's where our voices matters, right? All Dalits must speak, all Dalits must assert, all Dalits must write, all Dalits must share their experiences to dismantle the artifacts that are created by this caste, Hindu hegemony in these universities, in the public spaces. That's where all of us should collectively share this experience and march forward in the ideals of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Thank you. Jai Bhim.